So now we come to connective tissue. So connective tissue is almost like a catch-all for if it doesn't belong in the epithelial, so it's not a lining tissue, if it's not to help us move, so it's not a muscle tissue, and it's not a nervous tissue, pretty much everything else gets put in connective tissue. And you probably could guess what connective tissue does. It helps connect the other tissues together. So that's what we're going to see. I like this little chart that I've put in your notes because it kind of takes each of the types and shows you first off, it shows you a common origin, and so that's important. I would like you to know, especially for lecture, the common origin for connective tissue doesn't matter if it's blood or if it's bone or whatever, can be traced back to a cell known as a mesenchyme. So this is important for you to know as far as how they're all related to one another. They can be traced back to the mesenchyme placenta cells. Okay, so I do need to know that, especially for lecture. So we're going to go through each of these types, and they're divided into well, I guess they're divided into their functions, but also more what they're made up of. So in the lecture video, I talk about the fibers and ground substances. So you can see that we have connective tissue proper is going to have two different kinds, whether they're loose or dense. If they have just a few fibers, they're loose connective tissue. If they have lots of fibers, not a lot of ground substance, they're going to be dense. So we're really going to stay down here in this level under each one. And there's a couple that we're not going to go over just because they get a little bit more difficult. We're not going to see them a lot. So you can mark out reticular here, and you could mark out elastic here under the dense connective tissue. We are going to talk about elastic cartilage. So this is going to pretty much drive the ones we're going to look at, and then we're not going to look at the histology. So in lab, histology means the slides looking at the tissue under the microscopes for a few of them. So we are going to do the histology for this one, no, neither one of those. Hyaline we will, the compact, spongy, and blood. So you can see that there are 6 histology, 6 slides. Now the others we will be looking at models where we would find those. But so as we get to these slides and it says no histology, that means you're not responsible to what the slide looks like for that. All right. Let's start. Let's start with the areolar. Areolar or areolar connective tissue, and so in lab I'm just going to have you put CT so that you know that it's connective tissue. And so what that does is it wraps and cushions around our organs, and so we see it on lots of spots. Remember, always underneath that epithelial tissue, underneath that basement membrane, there was always connective tissue. Well, most of that connective tissue probably is areolar. So in your note things, it says, what does it look like? Well, to me, what it looks like is a hot mess. It looks like a hairball is what it looks like to me. You've got these really thin fibers, and you've got these cells that are running through there. And so it looks like if somebody were sweeping up some hair off of the floor, this is what it looks like to me. I call it a hot mess. So where we're going to find that hot mess for lab purposes, so under your skin here, there is that basement membrane. This is called the papillary layer. Right underneath it, it's part of the dermis. So right underneath here, pretty much where all these blood vessels are located here, is where we're going to find that areolar. So this is where it would get tagged in lab. So found in the papillary layer of your skin. It's really a sublayer of the dermis, the papillary layer is. All right, next one. Oh, this is just a really good picture here of showing the papilla of that papillary layer, and we pull that off, and so this is where we are finding that areolar tissue. Up there above that basement membrane is that uh, stratified squamous epithelial tissue. All right. So our next one is adipose tissue. So adipose is basically fat. So adipose connective tissue is storing your fats. And so in lab underneath the microscope, they look like just a bunch of bubbles that are empty is what they look like. They're not empty, they're filled with fat, and when the fat, it doesn't stain under the microscope, so it just pretty much looks clear, almost clear. What happens is these cells fill up with fat and they'll push their nuclei to the end. So you're seeing some nuclei pushed into the end, and of course sometimes when they cut you're seeing them overlap. That's what the little dots are you can occasionally see. So adipose tissue, basically fat, adipose connective tissue. Where is that located? Well, it is located all over our body, some parts more than others, but where we're going to tag it in lab is right here in the hypodermis. You see all that yellow there, that is adipose tissue. These little cells we've got going on here. And so in our skin. So hypodermis, hypo lower than the dermis, we've got the dermis there. That's where we find that adipose tissue. So then we start getting into those were the loose connective tissue. We get into dense connective tissue, and we're just going to go over these two main types, which is going to be dense regular connective tissue and dense irregular, and they are actually based on how they line themselves up. The reason we're not going to look at the histology, it looks a lot like smooth muscle under the microscope, so you would confuse it. So you can see they're lining up for dense regular and dense irregular, they don't line up. This allows for some pulling action, and this allows pulling in one direction. This allows some pulling in multiple directions. So the irregular allows for tension in multiple directions, and this only allows in one direction, the regular. So here is the dense regular connective tissue. The collagen, which is what we're seeing in this tissue, lines up in one direction, and it allows for the tension only in one direction. And that, I know that looks like a muscle there, but that actually is a ligament you're looking at that. And the reason that is a ligament, it's connecting a bone to a bone. So you'll find the dense regular connective tissue in tendons and ligaments. And I would like you to know the difference between a tendon and a ligament. They both attach to a bone. Do you see that? They both attach to bones. So a tendon is going to attach a muscle to a bone, and a ligament attaches a bone to a bone, as what we're seeing here. So this is a ligament you're seeing here. I had a student once say, the way I'm going to remember this is I'm going to think about chicken tenders, and chicken tenders are muscles, so I'm going to remember chicken tenders is muscle to bone, and then ligaments would be bone to bone. So I do need you to know the difference between a tendon and a ligament. You will see that on your Unit 2 test. Alright, so then we get the irregular, so the collagens don't line up in this, they're kind of going all different directions, and that allows for the tension to go in many directions. And notice it says no histology, so we won't be looking at that under the microscope. The location we will find this is going to be, we've got the dermis here, and we've got in that papillary layer of the dermis, you've got that areolar. So underneath it, so in this area, we'll just call that blood vessel the thing. And before you get into that hypodermis, in this area here is where you're going to find that dense irregular connective tissue, and I should have put CT on that. So that is where you're going to find it. It's known as the reticular layer of the dermis.